everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Erik Schaefer. And today he will be navigating event sourcing key considerations for beginners. Take it away, Erik.
Thanks, Natasha. All right, so we're going to discuss event sourcing, hopefully point out a few things for beginners and anyone else who needs a refresher. So again, I'm Erik Schaefer. I'm a developer advocate here at Event Store. There's various ways to contact me if you have questions or follow-up comments, what have you. And on that note, if you want to attend future webinars, whether it's live or you're looking at the video on demand, a VOD, there's a website, eventstore.com/webinars to check out more. There is going to be a sequel follow-up of sorts to this one. It's going to be a bit more in-depth, a bit more specific, show some code, show more of the nitty-gritty, and that's developer tips to get the most from event sourcing. So it's kind of going to be the successor to this, but there's other ones as well from other presenters hitting all sorts of different topics. So check those out, and also check out our Discord community. That community page also has links to our other social mediums. So let's get going. Our agenda here, I'm going to talk about the traditional data model or mindset, a very brief introduction, or perhaps a re-highlight of event sourcing. Just make sure we're all on the same page, using the same verbiage, discussing why it's not a silver bullet, even though that would be great. When it's not a good fit, talking about some use cases, some industries it's historically popular in, and also ones that may surprise you. And then we're going to talk about how it can empower and enable event-driven architecture, those decisions, and kind of recap a few things. So let's dive in. So the traditional data model, and when I say CRUD mental model, I don't mean to be derogatory, but we're talking about the create, read, update, and delete operations that we are all, I assume, used to. So the traditional data model, a lot of us, when we understand that we need to be parsing or storing, persisting data, a lot of us have a mental model that we've had for years, perhaps decades, that is akin to what is in front of us. It's effectively tables, spreadsheets, sheets. These are things that, whether we're new to the software development game, or perhaps we were exposed to something like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets at a young age, a lot of us have this mental model of kind of slicing up the data and how to store it. And when I refer to traditional data model, I'm specifically talking about relational models, but NoSQL and document store type solutions have been around for a while, but they've gotten popular, and I'm not really going to highlight those here, but this is what I'm referring to when I personally talk about the traditional data model. So again, our friend CRUD, create, read, update, delete. If we need to update something in, let's say, like a restaurant table, we need to change the name of a restaurant from the Sushi Hook to Sapporo Sushi Station, then we update it. And that's fine. It does the job. That's how many systems arguably work in the world. Whether a company is using relational databases or has an Excel spreadsheet that's running the business. But you're losing that opportunity to capture that change and to make note of it and react to it and identify, saying, oh, this is what happened, in the case of needing to debug or having thorough tests and making sure state changes are successful. You're losing that opportunity. And for some domains, for some use cases, some industries, that's okay. And we're going to discuss that a little bit further. So let's just recap what event sourcing is now that we've gone over that traditional data model. One example I like using, mostly because I need it every day, is when you go to a coffee shop and it's going from right to left, because of course, but really event sourcing in a way allows you to model things after real life. So if I were to go to a coffee shop, I would order the coffee, pay for it, I would hope. It's going to be prepared by a barista, and then it'll be delivered or handed off to me. So these are potential names of events. And you can notice, if again, if you're familiar with event sourcing already, they're past tense. They're meant to be hopefully concise, but descriptive enough. In a larger domain, it might not be, or depending on your use case, might not be coffee ordered. It might just be order placed. And, maybe I'm not ordering coffee. I'm ordering hot cocoa or something, right? So not to get too specific, but I think that's worth mentioning. So what is an event? So again, happened in the past. So we use the past tense, and it's immutable. It happened and we can't change it. That can lead to larger discussions regarding things like GDPR and what if we need to shred personal identifiable information. Though those are definitely topics that are very important, and we do have content regarding that on the Event Store blog. But for now, just know that once it's done, it's recorded. Boom, that's it. And we'll talk about these other 2 points a little bit later, but it's not really critical for right now. And that is that events can be ignored, again, not removed, and they can be interpreted differently, right? Different perspectives. So again, going with our example, coffee's been ordered rather. So this order's been initialized, and this is for a delivery service. I apologize, getting ahead of myself. But let's say it's a delivery service version instead of being in shop. So the order's been initialized. The driver has been assigned, right? It's not instantaneous. Someone has to go, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I'll deliver Erik his coffee. The driver would pick up said order, in this case, coffee, and then it's dropped off. And that's, again, a very high level look at some events for a delivery service. But I know when I began event sourcing, my event sourcing journey, this really didn't make sense. It seemed almost too easy or not descriptive enough. So let's just kind of pretend we're using some JSON to construct these ideas, because I know some of you love to look at things in a code format. So coffee ordered might look something like this, where we have an order ID, customer ID, and let's pretend location isn't there. Let's say there's a contact list field because I don't. Maybe I'm sick, and the driver doesn't need to be near me, and then a timestamp of sorts. Then there's other data like who the driver is. Maybe there's their display name, their preferred name, right? There's later on when you're picking up the order, there's a list of the items, probably a bit more descriptive, but maybe I'm just ordering a whole lot. And then when it was dropped off, how it was dropped off, if it was handed off, left at the doorstep, what have you. But this again also could lead to a larger discussion regarding event evolution, or sometimes called event schema evolution. Not going to dive into that here. There's again content on our blog, but that location field that I put in red, maybe that's something that's added later in a version 2 of the coffee ordered event. Maybe it's everything's constructed in what's called a weak schema, and it's just added because the system can handle it if it's not there, and if it is, great. There's other strategies as well, but again, we're not going to dive into that today. And as mentioned, you can have all sorts of descriptive, granular events being recorded. There was 4 previously, now we have 8, where we have order initialized, we have a write ahead event, which I'm not going to dive into too much here, but it's saying this thing is about to happen. It's really important that I let everyone know it's about to happen. So locating a driver, the driver's been prompted or asked saying, hey, we have this delivery. It's a mile or 2 away. Do you want to accept it? And here there's an event called driver accepted delivery. Maybe it would also be a driver declined, and that's just recorded. So there is now a recording, a persisted occurrence of what happened. So again, that helps developers, that helps the business, right? It can derive quite a bit of value to understand who's accepting what and perhaps deriving why. But anyways, there's awaiting the order. Perhaps that driver gets to the restaurant, the coffee shop early, and they're now waiting. And this can be a notification sent out, right, to the customer. Same with order picked up, driver nearby, order delivered. So when you have your phone out and you do something like this and you get notifications, in the event sourcing world, we're also persisting these things, but they can trigger these outside or external events. And we'll go into that a little bit. But again, this is just an example of how granular you can get. So this whole series of events, right? These 8 here, this belongs to an event stream. And the definition is it's an ordered sequence of events. It's important that it's ordered because that is the story we're telling. I like to mention or call event sourcing a storytelling technique, because it helps you understand what is happening and why the decision's made. And that all belongs to an event stream. So here again, simple version of that initial stream we went over, but you might have multiple streams. You might have, B and C and D and, and hundreds or thousands, millions more perhaps, because there's other customers or however you divide up your events and your streams. And again, that is a topic into itself. What are best practices? How should it be done? Things like that. Not going to cover that really here, but there's some great content on our blog. So what we've been talking about is what some folks call the right side. So if you're familiar with CQRS, Command Query Responsibility Segregation, I always have to think about that. You'll know that it also has a read or write or a command and query side. So in the event sourcing context, we're talking about the right side where we're writing these decisions, these happenings, these state changes or facts, as they're sometimes called, to the append-only immutable log that we call our event store. It's basically just recording all the decisions made, and those decisions could be in if-else blocks in the code. They might need manual intervention. Let's say it's an insurance or the mortgage world, and an underwriter needs to approve something. Maybe there's some automation there, but for some of these very specific things when it comes to health or mortgages, someone has to say, hey, I have the credentials and I approve or deny this. Maybe here's my reason, and things wait on that. But point being is that decision is now being recorded as an event, right? It's been written down. So as mentioned, there's a read side. We sometimes call this the query side in reference to CQRS. But one thing I've noticed over the last couple of years, more and more people call it the reactive side, and we'll discuss why that is. So the read side can take those events and project them into creating materialized views or read models. So if certain events were to happen, like delivery driver is awaiting order or driver nearby, right, as we talked about, not only are those events just being recorded on the right side and being appended to a stream, which is part of a giant, potentially giant immutable log, they can allow for reactivity, where if you have a projection that's saying, hey, I noticed this event came in, it can then kick off all sorts of things, right? Really, you're limited to your creativity, but maybe it creates a new event. Maybe it creates what folks call an external event or a message. So if you're not using event store for everything regarding events in your system, maybe you put that on some sort of other message broker and have that sent out, right? Fanned out, and systems react to that however it is. And we'll talk about that correlation and enablement in a second here. But, why is the icon not showing? Well, there's supposed to be a projector there, an old time movie projector, but this is what we call projections or projecting. Is you take all these facts and state changes that have happened and you act on them. I personally have grown quite fond of calling it the reactive side because it sounds a bit more impressive, but really as you construct more and more event source systems and applications, you get a better understanding of what it can do for you. and what value it can bring, I would say that is the real killer feature or best hidden secret, should be hidden, of event sourcing is you have all this data that's context rich, it's granular, things of that nature. What can you do with it? I think that's what people get stuck up on. And this is the whole navigating event sourcing part is great. I'm recording things, hopefully, again, with good details, not too much, not too little, things like that. You're working with your business partners, your domain experts, you're creating meaningful events, not just something saying order updated, order updated, order updated. But what can you do with all that data? So you can write it to your good old cruddy relational database table or document store or something like Elasticsearch. You could do all of those things because why not? If something is triggered on that reactive side, yeah, go ahead and write, a read model in all these formats, write to all these things. Maybe you need to reach out to an API gateway. And you need to write something in a JSON format, an XML format, what have you, right? You can do all those things. You're not just limited to one thing. So there's all sorts of event sourcing or all sorts of benefits to event sourcing. Auditing's always mentioned as the first thing, it seems, if you were to go back to more classical documents on how to event source 101. But really, I think it's worth mentioning that the fact you can replay things, you have enhanced testing because you can see all the state changes, all that context and intent is captured because, again, ideally you're working with your business partners and recording the right thing and you're naming these things well so they make sense. Because here's a tip. The domain names and the data in them should make sense to a non-technical domain expert or end user. That name, even if it's not some official name of an official process, if they read it and see some of the details, they should go, oh yeah, yep, that's important to capture. That's an important step, whether it's a defined step or not. Maybe it's a technical need, but it should make sense to the people that are using this or are the decision makers on how these processes work for the business. But all sorts of other benefits. Like I said, because of that structuring and working with the business, you have better workflows and use cases outlined, things like that. And really, one thing I really have grown fond of is event sourcing allows you kind of future-proof for tomorrow's use cases or tomorrow's problems. Because again, you have all this rich data. If you need to create a new projection and say, yeah, let's make a report based on the last year, you can do that because you recorded things that way. It's pretty cool. Let's continue and not dive into every single bullet point. So right now I am hyping up event sourcing quite a bit. I'm a big fan, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not a solution to all problems in the world. And it is not, should not be treated like a golden hammer because, I'm going to mess up the saying. When you have that hammer, every problem is going to look like a nail. And eventually you're going to hit your fingers. It's going to hurt. So think about your fingers. So what is event sourcing not a good fit? I've talked about all these benefits and cool things it provides. Well, one question you should start off with that I learned from a mentor of mine is this module that this event sourcing capability is going to be in, is it considered core or supportive? So if it's more of a supportive role, you likely don't need event sourcing. But what does supportive mean? Really where it's some auxiliary system where you don't need to capture context or the intent or any granular details. So another way to look at it or consider it is if you were to conduct analysis over the events that are written, whether or not if you have like a data science team or an analysis team or what have you. So regardless of that, if there was analysis being done, would it be beneficial? If not, it's probably supportive or non-core role. So probably don't need it. But theoretically, if analysis is being done or a report could be generated from this, things of that nature, right? Where you're using all that rich context data, then you probably have something that could benefit from event sourcing. The other way to look at it is if that module of code, that application, that slice treats data like a bag. What does that mean? So something that maybe fuels like a content management system, like a blog post. So while it's nice to have all the versions of what led up to what is being published, it's not necessarily required for a lot of blogs. Same with polls that are basic. So not like user research where you're really diving in and trying to get everyone's meaning for their answers and get that context, which is important. But really, if it's just a lot of plain text or perhaps media, then you probably don't have a good use case for event sourcing. That said, I know there are folks out there that are doing research and analysis on media using event sourcing and event store DB. So creativity will always triumph sometimes. People use event store DB in all sorts of creative ways. But typically, if it's just treated like a bag of data and it's recorded once and fetched a bunch or what have you, it's not really being changed and the changes aren't impactful to the business, then you probably don't need event sourcing, right? So when is it good? Well, historically, a lot of us say, oh, whenever ledgers and transactions were historically recorded. So things like, related to money. People want to make sure they're getting paid, right? So things like industries like finance, accounting, banking, and gambling, things like transportation to account for everything, right? Inventory management, supply chain. These all, you can notice that these all really have overlap because it's tracking things, typically money or assets, but tracking things and knowing where they are, what's happened, who it goes to, why, decisions made, reversals if something was if there was a mistake, right? Having a clear record and a compensating event or compensating transaction, as it's sometimes called, is recorded, saying, oh, okay, like the bank accidentally gave Eric $1,000. They're not just going to take a pencil and erase it, which would be kind of weird nowadays, but they would go ahead and debit my account, right? So they would credit me, go, oopsie. I'm sure that would be what's written in the ledger, and then undo that, right? Clear record. So my short, sassy answer for when event sourcing is a good fit, aside from those historical examples, is all sorts of places, all sorts of industries. Whenever there is a technical and business value that the benefits can be easily noticed, like maybe you do need some sort of audit mechanism. Maybe you do need to have established workflows where every step is accounted for because it's really imperative, where event sourcing kind of lends itself there, right? Those, honestly, if you're needing to define workflows and procedures and steps, and if people can analyze those changes and leverage all those read models and reactivity, again, from the technical side, then you probably have a good case for event sourcing. And that's something that I'm kind of on a personal mission to hopefully make people realize that it doesn't have to be in those historical industries. But there are socio-technical factors at play here too. And this is where this is just reality. So, do you know your domain well? Maybe you've been experimenting with event sourcing. Maybe you've put it in production once before or have a proof of concept, and you're on a new team and you think there would be a good fit, but no one else is familiar with it. How comfortable are you leading that team and having that effort become something that goes into production? Can you start small? I would say that's the next follow-up question. Can you start small, have it be non-critical, perhaps isolated, maybe if it's a proof of concept or something? Are there any other experienced practitioners? And that's just the reality of this. I think saying, yeah, let's just do event sourcing. Let's go. Let's do it. That's not an opportunity many of us can afford, can be in. So there are aspects like that. But as event sourcing grows in popularity, which it certainly is, I think these barriers are going to be lowered. That's my personal take on the matter. As there's more tools and understanding of this paradigm and how it differs from CRUD and how valuable it can be, I think it's going to be easier to do. But these are real things that architects and developers need to be asking themselves. So one other thing I think that's worth mentioning that people sometimes get maybe a little stuck on, and once they start implementing it, they probably get stuck on the implementation, which we're going to cover more so in that upcoming webinar. But event sourcing really does help enable and empower event-driven architecture. So while the motivations, as you could call it, behind EDA and event sourcing are different, because event-driven architecture is an architecture, right? It's how you communicate between services, whether they're microservices or part of a monolith, whatever. But event sourcing is technically just a data storage technique. It's I sometimes call it a paradigm because it's different than CRUD, which is how almost everything works. But it really is just a data storage technique. How do you record things? How do you retrieve it? That's really what it is. It's not a top-level architecture. Even though it does have that historical, granular, context-rich approach as opposed to CRUD. But because you have that granularity, the context, the intent defined, and because we have that reactive side, right, you can have those events that are part of your event-driven architecture, which we sometimes call outside events or messages. Depends. Naming is tough. We all know that. But you can have these internal events that are being recorded to your immutable event log. You can have them say, oh, hey, so I finished this shopping order. We just got the payment. Now go send off a message to the ordering service or inventory service or what have you, right? So these services, they have their own kind of domains, or what in the DDD world is called a bounded context. Not going to really dive into that. Might describe something a little wrong here, but you have these contexts that these streams are living in. And because you have that reactivity, whether you launch off another job or event or message or what have you, you have really the creativity is your main boundary here, where if you have the granularity and everything really well defined, because you've been working with your domain partners, domain experts, what have you, you can then react better, right? Because maybe, oh goodness, you might have events that aren't very detailed, and you realize, okay, we need to figure out if we actually need to send off messages or fan out these messages to other systems. How do we evolve these events? And it really kind of enables that discussion for having a good, thorough, event-driven architecture. So yeah, all sorts of opportunities there. So here's a really cool diagram that Eve here at Event Store made. And you can see that the user is over here to the left. We're on the read side. We're appending events, right? We're writing it to the Event Store DB. And then you have this reactivity side. You're subscribing to certain events and triggers, right? And you can get very complex with these, with projections, but you're basically subscribing and you're saying, hey, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Maybe you're just waiting for one specific event. Maybe you're waiting for a multitude of certain variables to really sync up. And then you can go ahead and write data to a document database, graph database, relational database. Again, shoot off emails, put it into another database of any kind, process or automate other tasks, or write new events, right? And just kind of not be cyclical in a bad way. That is not a fun thing to debug, but produce new events that then have their own decision-making things that need to happen and have their own projections. So really it's like a cascading effect of, hey, we did A, we need to do B. Oh, don't do C because of these values. We can go ahead, do D, what have you, right? So creativity, I think one reason I really like event sourcing, this is a little off the cuff here, but one reason I like event sourcing and event-driven architecture is that it really allows for creativity to spill forth in a good way, as opposed to just updating rows in a relational database and reading these these traditional models and trying to quasi react to them, say, okay, like I did this thing, now I'm going to read it, and if this, do that. And it just, the code's kind of hard to parse. So when you have an event sourcing system, when I'm talking about event driven architecture enablement, I'm specifically referring to the fact that things are granular. You can tell the story that is happening, right, with all those events. Just like the events we went over earlier with the coffee delivery, we might have hit a couple different microservices depending on how that architecture and infrastructure was set up. Maybe it's all in the same one, doubtful, but point being is that these events are being recorded and you can react however is necessary. And it allows for a lot of loose coupling, allows you to scale better, all that fun stuff, all those buzzwords that you love. So event sourcing can enable a lot of things, and that's part of the, I think, overwhelming aspect that a lot of newcomers, as they're learning what it is, they get overwhelmed with, okay, so I can do A, B, C, and D, right? All these letters. But how do I do it? And Event Store DB, for the most part, makes it really easy because of the projection capabilities, at least in my experience, compared to some other alternatives. So I really like this diagram because it's a simple look, but it really shows you the power of this single database allows you to do so much. And I think it's worth mentioning before we wrap things up that because you can have materialized views being generated just as they always were, right? Maybe you have like a data management or Power BI team or whomever or other downstream subscribers, right? Like an adjacent team that is very responsible, dependent on what you write to a database, because maybe you're sharing a database, even though you know it's not a good practice. That's just the reality of things. Those downstream consumers don't need to know that you are now running an event source system. They may never know if you don't mention it, because you now have the reactive side responsible for all the writing you were previously doing, but now you're able to do it in a more granular way. You can react to things. You can send a notification saying, hey, this update's done. You can go check it out, what have you. And that's one thing that I've learned in my event sourcing journey is if things are working well, constructed well, no one may be of the wiser, but they're going to know that you have a lot more capabilities and you have a lot richer data that you can leverage. And they're going to say, hey, what are you doing? That's different than before. So, okay, let's recap a little bit. So event sourcing, not your traditional data model. A lot of us have this mental model that we're used to from years and years, decades and decades, perhaps, of thinking of data in like a table or spreadsheet. That's how we slice it up. We store it this way. We're going to have a foreign key, an index or two, bada boom. Now, just because event sourcing allows more rich context type data, it's not a silver bullet, but it isn't just limited to these ledger-based industries of old. It really is gaining more popularity. There's more use cases popping up. There's something called the sidecar of truth that I would implore you to check out on Event Store's blog. Not going to go into it here, but there's all sorts of industries and use cases that we're discovering as people learn this paradigm, this data storage technique, and as more tooling grows, as more tooling grows around Event Store DB and our feature set grows, it's just going to become more evident that this is a great way to store data. So it helps solve tomorrow's problems, right? Because of the read, write side. Then we talked about it enables reactivity, and it enables event-driven architecture. Again, whether you're doing a fleet of microservices or some sort of modular monolith, whatever we call it nowadays, it enables you to be more event-driven overall and for teams to better communicate and work with each other. So that is a summary of navigating through event sourcing. There is so much more we could go into, but that's just the top of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erik. That was very, very good. So be sure to join us on the 5th of March. As Erik said, that will be the second part to this webinar, should we say, developer tips to get the most from event sourcing. Hopefully see you then. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks again.